Hi, and welcome to Political Quickie, your political show that subjectively discusses current affairs in South Africa and all around the world. My name is Map Asekamura. I don't know if you guys can hear that there is this dish sound going on. There is a party outside, and I apologize for that sound. Yeah, let's get straight into the news. However, 2019 marks 400 years since Africans were ripped off their land and taken to Jamestown, Virginia. Ghana is running a campaign titled Year of Return Ghana 2019. Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo calls it a birthright journey home for the African global family. So the initiative is encouraging Africans in the diaspora to come back home to Ghana and to experience where their ancestors were born. And it also encourages them to just come back home, okay? Come back home and actually live here, okay? Ghana has always been in the forefront in terms of encouraging Africans in the diaspora to return home. And I think this is so not only because Ghana itself was a huge slave trade hub or the gateway of slave trade, but I think this is so because, you know, even since its independence, former President Kwame Nkrumah understood the importance of Pan-Africanism. He was a huge Pan-Africanist who said, look, we need to have one currency, we need to be one nation. And he encouraged all Africans in the diaspora to come back home. And that set a precedent in Ghanaian politics to take the call of Africans to return home incredibly seriously. It's critical in that country. In the year 2000, Ghana passed the Citizenship Act, where any person in the African diaspora of Ghanaian descent could get dual citizenship, and they later passed the Immigration Act to ensure that Africans in the African diaspora can travel to Ghana without any issues. The African American situation, or the situation of Africans in the diaspora, is such an interesting thing. It's actually a paradox when you think about it, because African Americans were never really colonized in terms of the actual dictionary definition of the word colonization. But I would actually argue that they are the most colonized group of black people. It's crazy because we were colonized, right, in Africa, but there's still certain parts in Africa where we can practice our African culture. If I'm in the city, yes, we are colonized, yes, but I can go back home to Limpopo in the Bundus and practice my culture. Even in the city, I can to a certain extent, okay? But in the US or wherever you are in the African diaspora, it's interesting because you were inducted into Western norms and culture. So it's such an interesting thing. It's so interesting. Someone tagged me earlier, literally this morning, this article that someone wrote about this African American man who moved to Ghana to escape racial profiling and just the racism in the US. And I was just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, that has to be like the most difficult decision to make, because on one hand, African Americans absolutely have a claim. You guys literally build the US with your bare hands, right? And you've got a claim in the US because it belongs to you, you build it. But then on the other hand, so it makes sense if you would want to stay in the US, but then on the other hand, if you would want to return home, it also makes sense because this is the land of your ancestors. It is your birthright. This is your land. So it must be confusing to have to choose between the two. But I think at the end of the day, there is no right choice to make because you belong to both. Because you build this place, right, with your blood, with your sweat, with your tears, but also this is your home. You belong here. So, very interesting, very difficult. I think it's not just Ghana that should be doing this. I think this should actually be an African Union initiative calling to everyone in the African diaspora. Like, look, You can return home if you want, okay? You can have dual citizenship if you want. I think that would be incredibly interesting. And I know that, the different African countries, there's so much going on in our countries, and we're always worried about that. But I think that this is an issue of such importance, and we constantly need to not only be having this conversation, but figure out practical ways to ensure that Africans in the diaspora are not alienated. And another thing is, when Africans in the diaspora do move to Africa, woo! I mean, that is a culture shock. I cannot imagine. It should be a culture shock, because as much as this is home, there is so much that you grew up without knowing. Okay, maybe you read, maybe you watch documentaries, but it's not the same as being here. There's so much that Africans in the diaspora do not know about Africa, so much, because the day-to-day cannot be told in just a documentary or a movie. That is not enough. It's, you literally need to be here to understand what it's like. Then you won't be asking questions like, do you guys have libraries in Africa? I mean, hey, okay? So there's so much for you to learn. And yeah, we shall see if more people in the African diaspora decide to move back home this year, in the year of return. But like I said, there is no right choice. There is no right answer to this, because you have a claim to both. Literally. Hey, I told you I would see you next week. Anyways, I love you guys. Use your talents to serve humanity, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.